Come on, baby, get your kicks on a Route 66. That's right, baby. He looks oh so pretty well seen. Amarillo, Gallup, New Mexico. Flagstaff, Arizona, don't forget Winona, King, Mama, Bosco, or San Bernardino. Won't you get hip to this kindly tune? Then you're gonna make that California dream. Woo, come on, baby, get your kicks on a Route 66. Hey. Your kicks on Route 66. Get your kicks on Route 66. Get your kicks on Route 66. Lately, I've been thinking about the way things might have been. And lately, I've been sinking, and it's hard to get back up again. So if I seem a little distant and preoccupied, just know that little spark in me ain't died. Listen to the music, I'm playing this one for you. And now listen to the rhythm, a backbeat through and through. All I need's a little music to make me move, and a woman like you to make me groove. I want it funny, I want it bad.
Hillary Clinton doesn't understand why anyone would vote for Donald Trump. She sincerely doesn't, because she doesn't understand voters very well. And so it's driving her crazy when she says, why am I not 50 points ahead? She means it. That's the most authentic thing she has said all year.
Right. Now, having said all this, why aren't I 50 points ahead, you might ask?
They may smile at you on the street, but that doesn't mean they like you.
Well, the choice for working families has never been clearer. I need your help to get Donald Trump's record out to everybody.
I have been in outhouses that didn't stink that bad.
Nobody should be fooled.
Are you saying I'm stupid?
No,
Do I look stupid to you?
He proudly declared himself 100% right to work. Let's not lose sight of the real pain that many Americans are feeling because the economy has left them behind. He even hired a union-busting firm to break up an organizing campaign at his hotel in Las Vegas, where you are right now. And he built up his wealth by stiffing small businesses and contractors. That goes against everything we stand for as a country. And so I'm going to do what I've always done. I made it a practice to send emails that were work-related to people on their government accounts. I did not primarily conduct business on email. And I made it a practice.
I did not primarily conduct business on email.
And I made it a practice.
I did not. And I made it a practice.
I did not primarily conduct business on email. And I made it a practice.
And now more than ever, we need you to keep holding leaders and candidates accountable.
It was you!
Guess what? You just lost.
entry like everybody else under the rules of the new legal immigration system that I have outlined above. Those who have left to seek entry, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Those who have left to seek entry under this new system, and it will be an efficient system, will not be awarded surplus visas, but will have to apply for entry under the immigration caps or limits that will be established in the future. We will break the cycle of amnesty and illegal immigration. We will break the cycle. There will be no amnesty. Our message to the world will be this: you cannot obtain legal status or become a citizen of the United States by illegally entering our country. Can't do it. This declaration alone will help stop the crisis of illegal crossings and illegal overstays, very importantly. People will know that you can't just smuggle in, hunker down, and wait to be legalized. Not going to work that way. Those days are over. Importantly, in several years, when we have accomplished all of our enforcement and deportation goals and truly ended illegal immigration for good, including the construction of a great wall which we will have built in record time and at a reasonable cost, which you never hear from the government, and the establishment of our new lawful immigration system, then and only then will we be in a position to consider the appropriate disposition of those individuals who remain. That discussion can take place only in an atmosphere in which illegal immigration is a memory of the past, no longer with us, allowing us to weigh the different options available based on the new circumstances at the time. Right now, however, we are in the middle of a jobs crisis, a border crisis, and a terrorism crisis like never before. All energies of the federal government and the legislative process must now be focused on immigration security. That is the only conversation we should be having at this time. Immigration security. Cut it off. Whether it's dangerous materials being smuggled across the border, terrorists entering on visas, or Americans losing their jobs to foreign workers, these are the problems we must now focus on fixing. And the media needs to begin demanding to hear Hillary Clinton's answer on how her policies will affect Americans and their security. These are matters of life and death for our country and its people, and we deserve answers from Hillary Clinton. And you notice she doesn't answer. She didn't go to Louisiana. She didn't go to Mexico. She was invited. She doesn't have the strength or the stamina to make America great again, believe me. What we do know, despite the lack of media curiosity, is that Hillary Clinton promises a radical amnesty combined with a radical reduction in immigration enforcement. Just ask the Border Patrol about Hillary Clinton. You won't like what you're hearing. The result will be millions more illegal immigrants, thousands of more violent, horrible crimes, and total chaos and lawlessness. That's what's going to happen as sure as you're standing there. This election, and I believe this, is our last chance to secure the border, stop illegal immigration, and reform our laws to make your life better. I really believe this is it. This is our last time. November 8th. November 8th. You got to get out and vote on November 8th. It's our last chance. It's our last chance. And that includes Supreme Court justices and Second Amendment. Remember that. So I want to remind everyone what we're fighting for and who we are fighting for. I am going to ask, these are really special people that I've gotten to know. I'm going to ask all of the angel moms to come join me on the stage right now. These are amazing women. These are amazing people. I've become friends with so many, but Jamil Shaw, incredible guy, lost his son so violently. Say just a few words about your child.
My son, Ronald da Silva, was murdered April 27, 2002 by an illegal alien who had been previously deported. And what makes me so outrageous is that we came here legally. Thank you, Mr. Trump. I totally support you. You have my vote.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.
You know what? Name your child and come right by. Go ahead.
Laura Wilkerson, and my son was Joshua Wilkerson. He was murdered by an illegal in 2010, and I personally support Mr. Trump for our next president.
My name is Ruth Johnston Martin. My husband was shot by an illegal alien. He fought the good fight, but he took his last breath in 2002, and I support this man who is going to change this country for the better. God bless you.
My name is Maureen Maloney, and our son Matthew Denise was 23 years old when he was dragged a quarter of a mile to his death by an illegal alien, while horrified witnesses were banging on the truck trying to stop him.
Thank you.
Our son Matthew Denise, if Donald Trump were president in 2011, our son Matthew Denise and other Americans would be alive today.
Thank you. My name is Kathy Woods. My son Steve, a high school senior, 17 years old, went to the beach after a high school football game. The local gang came along, 9 members. The cars were battered to, like, about war in Beirut. And all I can say is they murdered him. And if Mr. Trump had been in office then, the border would have been secure, and our children would not be dead today.
Hi, my name is Brenda Sparks, and my son is named Eric Zepeda. He was raised by a legal immigrant from Honduras, only to be murdered by an illegal in 2011. His murderer never did a second in handcuffs or jail. Got away with killing an American. So I'm voting for Trump. And by the way, so is my mother.
My name is Dee Engle. My cousin Rebecca Ann Johnston, known as Becky, was murdered on January the 1st, 1989 in North Little Rock, Arkansas. Thank you. And if you don't vote Trump, we won't have a country. Trump all the way.
I'm Shannon Estes, and my daughter Shaylee Estes, 22 years old, was murdered here in Phoenix last July 24th by a Russian who overstayed his visa. And vote Trump.
I'm Mary Ann Mendoza, the mother of Sergeant Brandon Mendoza, who was killed in a violent head-on collision May 12, 2014 in Mesa. Thank you. And I want to thank Phoenix for the support you've always given me. And I want to tell you what, I'm supporting the man who is the only man who's going to save our country and what we are going to be leaving our children.
I'm Steve Ronnebeck, father of Grant Ronnebeck, 21 years old, killed January 22nd, 2015 by an illegal immigrant who shot him in the face. I truly believe that Mr. Trump is going to change things. He's going to fight for my family, and he's going to fight for America.
These are amazing people. And I'm not asking for their endorsement, I believe me that. I just think I've gotten to know so many of them and many more from our group. But they are incredible people, and what they're going through is incredible, and there's just no reason for it. So let's give them a really tremendous hand. That's tough stuff, I will tell you. That is tough stuff. Incredible people. So now is the time for these voices to be heard. Now is the time for the media to begin asking questions on their behalf. Now is the time for all of us as one country, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, to band together to deliver justice and safety and security for all Americans. Let's fix this horrible, horrible problem. It can be fixed quickly. Let's secure our border. Let's stop the drugs and the crime from pouring into our country. Let's protect our Social Security and Medicare. Let's get unemployed Americans off the welfare and back to work in their own country. This has been an incredible evening. We're going to remember this evening. November 8th, we have to get everybody, this is such an important state. November 8th, we have to get everybody to go out and vote. We're going to bring, thank you, we're going to take our country back, folks. This is a movement. We're going to take our country back. Thank you. Thank you. This is an incredible movement. The world is talking about it. The world is talking about it. And by the way, if you haven't been looking at what's been happening at the polls over the last 3 or 4 days, I think you should start looking. You should start looking. Together we can save American lives, American jobs, and American futures. Together, we can save America itself. Join me in this mission. We're going to make America great again. Thank you. I love you. Thank you. God bless you, everybody.
Treat people the very best I can the first time I interact with them, and after that I treat them as they treat me.
What is the philosophical meaning of the word justice?
So justice is accepting and universalizing the other person's innate principle of their behavior, and recognizing that no person who initiates an action can justly complain if that action is returned to them. Right? So if I go and push some guy, I'm saying it's fine to push people. So I can't complain if that person pushes me back. If Bob pushes over Sally, Sally pushes him back, and he then cries and complains and says that she's so mean for doing it, we recognize that that's unjust, because by complaining that the other person is doing something wrong, by Bob complaining that Sally pushed him over, he's saying that he knows that pushing over someone is wrong, but he pushed over Sally to begin with. Right? So that's the huge problem. And people who know what they're doing is wrong and justify what they're doing, those are the people, if I had to make a line in the sand, those are the people to whom retaliation has value. Whatever people justify, they will repeat. So because whatever people justify, they will repeat, if somebody's justifying their immoral actions against you, and you don't act against them back, then you're complicit in the repetition. Payback, principled payback, proportional restitution and principled payback, I think those are the sort of two sides of the arch that holds up the concept of justice. And people feel uncomfortable about this. I treat people the very best I can the first time I interact with them, and after that I treat them as they treat me. People have a tough time with this. They really do. Because what you want to get out of Socrates is turn the other cheek. That's what people want to get out of Jesus, turn the other cheek. That's not how justice works. Now, there are times when turning the other cheek will reduce the presence of immorality in the world. But there are times when turning the other cheek will escalate the presence of immorality in the world. You have to be flexible to what's going on, and justice should seek to reduce the amount of immorality in the world, and sometimes that means turning the other cheek, and sometimes it doesn't. And that's why the second keystone of the arch or the second side of the arch is so important, which is the person justifying what they do? And if they are justifying what they do, then turn the other cheek is only going to reward that behavior and therefore cause an increase in immorality in the world. If they are self-attacking with regards to their behavior, if they have a conscience, then turning the other cheek will increase the amount of morality in the world, because your gentleness and kindness and sensitivity to their moral sensitivity will be viewed as a positive thing for them, and it will enhance their empathy, which we need for people to behave well. If you are intent on committing immoral actions, then your goal is to paralyze retaliation, right? Now, there are two ways to paralyze retaliation. Number one is to preach turn the other cheek. If you can convince people to turn the other cheek, then it rewards people who are justifying their own actions, and will continue. Now, and that turn the other cheek is terrible, because it requires that bad people recognize the virtues of good people. This is why, if it's not pushed back against, it's going to escalate, because it's justified, right? This is how you know whether to push back or turn the other cheek. If the person's justifying what they're doing, it's only going to escalate unless you push back. And of course, I just mean sort of verbally and all that. But
right.
That's I think that's the dividing line, and that's where people have a tough time. Because we would all like to turn the other cheek in many cases, right? Because it's easier and nicer, and we can buy ourselves 5 more minutes apiece. But there are times where turning the other cheek is going to escalate dysfunction and immorality in the world, and it comes around whether the person who is being aggressive is justifying their own actions particularly according to a moral standard. Then you are not in the turn the other cheek territory anymore, right? So that's the huge problem. And people who know what they're doing is wrong and justify what they're doing, those are the people, if I had to make a line in the sand, those are the people to whom retaliation has value. Those are the people to whom retaliation has value. I treat people the very best I can the first time I interact with them, and after that I treat them as they treat me.
They may smile at you on the street, but that doesn't mean they like you.
Get hip to this kindly tip, then you're gonna make that.
Don't let it happen again.
I won't get down in the mud with them. I won't play politics with national security or dishonor the memory of those who we lost. The fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. What difference does it make? And so I'm going to do what I've always done.
And I think, what we've learned here is, nothing.
I will reiterate, because it's a fact, nothing I sent or received was marked classified.
Give me some time. I'll come up with a plan.
Just don't tell him the truth.
They can't know the truth. The truth you see is bad. I will be branded with this mistake for the rest of my life.
Play politics with national security or dishonor the memory of those who we lost.
In the aftermath, what became clear was that the security was lax, that not all the precautions that needed to be taken were taken.
Also developed evidence that the security culture of the State Department was generally lacking in the kind of care for classified information that's found elsewhere in the U.S. government.
And now more than ever, we need you to keep holding leaders and candidates accountable.
It was you! Don't let it happen again.
Refinance and pay down your student debt. I want we can have a renaissance in manufacturing and jobs that will give people good livings and the private they can make college affordable for everyone. We need to pass a law finally that says people who are on the terrorist watch list can't buy.
Well, if you ever plan to move west, you better take my way. I want to stay. I wanted to have the world's most recognized face, but then I wouldn't have you standing here with me. So maybe I'm satisfied. Well, maybe I'm satisfied.
But I do have this old-fashioned idea. When you run for president, you ought to tell the voters of America what you would do as president. So I am going to keep telling you what I would do because I want you to hold me accountable, press and citizens alike.
First rule of leadership: everything
is your fault.
We have instead a Republican nominee who has been virulently anti-immigrant. But there's nothing like winning to change minds.
Guess what? You just lost.
Are you mischaracterizing Director Comey's testimony? And is this not undercutting your efforts to rebuild trust?
Give me some time. I'll come up with a plan.
Just don't tell him the truth.
They can't. They can't know the truth. The truth you see is bad. I will be branded with this mistake for the rest of my life.
Well, Kristen, I appreciate your asking that because I was pointing out in both of those instances that the Director Comey had said that my answers in my FBI interview were truthful. That's really the bottom line here.
Secretary Clinton said there was nothing marked classified on her emails either sent or received. Was that true?
That's not true.
Secretary Clinton said I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email. There is no classified material. Was that true?
There was classified material
Secretary
emailed.
Clinton said she used just one device. Was that true?
She used multiple devices.
Secretary Clinton said all work-related emails were returned to the State Department. Was that true?
No, we found work-related emails, thousands, that were not
Secretary
returned.
Clinton said her lawyers read every one of the emails and were overly inclusive. Did her lawyers read the email content individually?
No.
Well, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through any more of the false statements.
And I have said during the interview and in many other occasions over the past months that what I told the FBI, which he said was truthful, is consistent with what I have said publicly.
Guess what? You just lost.
So I may have short-circuited it, and for that I, will try to clarify because I think, Chris Wallace and I were probably talking past each other because, of course, he could only talk to what I had told the FBI, and I appreciated that. Now, I have acknowledged repeatedly that using two email accounts was a mistake.
Do I look stupid to you?
And I take responsibility for that. But I do think, having him say that my answers to the FBI were truthful, and then I should quickly add what I said was consistent with what I had said publicly. And that's really sort of, in my view, trying to tie both ends together.
The one inconsistency, though, that you said you never sent or received classified material, and he did say there were 3 emails that were marked classified at the time. Is that an inconsistency?
Well, here are the facts behind that as well. I sent over 30,000 emails to the State Department that were work-related emails. Director Comey said that only 3 out of 30,000 had anything resembling classified markers. What does that mean? Well, usually, if any of you have ever served in the government, a classified document has a big heading on the top, which makes very clear what the classification is. And in questioning, Director Comey made the point that the 3 emails out of the 30,000 did not have the appropriate markings. And it was therefore reasonable to conclude that anyone, including myself, would have not suspected that they were classified.
But even if information is not marked classified in an email, participants who know or should know that the subject matter is classified are still obligated to protect it.
In fact, I think that has been discussed by others who have said 2 out of those 3 were later explained by the State Department not to have been in any way confidential at the time that they were delivered.
None of these emails should have been on any kind of unclassified system.
So that leaves the 100 out of 30,000 emails that Director Comey testified contained classified information. But again, he acknowledged there were no markings on those 100 emails. And so What we have here is pretty much what I have been saying throughout this whole year, and that is that I never sent or received anything that was marked classified. And now more than ever, we need you to keep holding leaders and candidates accountable.
They may smile at you on the street, but that doesn't mean they like you.
And during these past 18 months, people across our country have described to me how hard it's been to get back on their feet in an economy that is still not working the way we all want to see it. So as bad as things became, 9 million jobs lost, 5 million homes lost, $13 trillion in family wealth wiped out, as bad as it was, there's no telling how far down we would have gone without his leadership. And in my first 100 days, I'm going to introduce legislation for comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship.
La mujer migrante, al menos la que pasa por aquí, por esta región, en el 80% va a ser violada. Entonces, al menos se va a proteger.
Of course, I hope you will compare what I'm proposing to what my opponent is talking about.
Are you saying I'm stupid? Do I look stupid to you?
Now, here's one measure that you could use for that comparison. An independent economist recently calculated that if my agenda for jobs and growth is put into place, our economy would create at least 10.4 million jobs within 4 years. We actually think it could be more than that.
I have been in outhouses that didn't stink that bad.
Now, this economist also ran the numbers on Donald Trump, including his disastrous and inhumane plan to round up and deport millions of hardworking immigrants.
You lied to the colony. You lied to me.
The result, according to Mark Zandi, who was the economic advisor to John McCain during his 2008 run for the presidency, the result of Trump's plans would be a lengthy recession with 3.4 million jobs lost. So as bad as things became, 9 million jobs lost, 5 million homes lost, $13 trillion in family wealth wiped out, as bad as it was, there's no telling how far down we would have gone without his leadership. Now, of course, Donald Trump's problems go far beyond economics. At every turn, he stokes division and resentment. He says horrible things about one group of Americans after another.
The fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
Anything to encourage more illegal immigration into this country.
Look, I voted numerous times when I was a senator to spend money to build a barrier to try to prevent illegal immigrants from coming in.
You know, secure our borders with technology, personnel, physical barriers if necessary. We need to have tougher employer sanctions.
He's hearkening back to the most shameful chapters of our history and appealing to the ugliest impulses of our society. You know the list, you've reported on it. He started this campaign by describing Mexican immigrants as criminals and rapists.
La mujer migrante, al menos la que pasa por aquí, por esta región,
en el 80% va a ser violada, entonces al menos se va protegiendo para no quedar embarazada.
He talks about banning Muslims from coming to the United States and built on religious freedom. And yes, he also talks about curtailing press freedom as well. We need to stand up as a country. And now more than ever, we need you to keep holding leaders and candidates accountable.
Don't tell me a story. Just take responsibility.
Everyone, Republican, Democrat, and Independent, needs to stand up and speak out. It's when you take a stand, when you denounce injustice. So I hope you'll keep calling it like you see it. Keep holding all of us accountable.
It was you!
And of course, I hope you will compare what I'm proposing to what my opponent is talking about, to what my opponent is talking about.
Greetings, citizens of the radio world. It has come to our attention that the radio station known as Pirate Radio Number 9 has been saying unkind things about Hillary Clinton and the DNC. This old grouch you have contact with must be stopped. These actions will no longer be tolerated. We are anonymous. We are Legion. We will take you down. We control your access to the internet. We control your YouTube account. We are everywhere, even in your videos. We will hack and control them all. We are anonymous. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.
Get hip to this kindly tip, then you're gonna make that California trip. Woo, come on, baby, get your kicks on Route 66. Hey.
7 email chains concern matters that were classified at the top secret special access program at the time they were sent and received. Those chains involve Secretary Clinton both sending emails about those matters and receiving emails about those same matters.
I will reiterate, because it's a fact, nothing I sent or received was marked classified.
Don't tell me a story. Just take responsibility.
I did not primarily conduct business on email with officials in our government. And I made it a practice to send emails that were work-related to people on their government account.
They may smile at you on the street, but that doesn't mean they like you.
I don't respond to Donald Trump and his string of insults about me. I can take care of myself. I look forward to running against him if he turns out to be the Republican nominee, if I am the Democratic nominee. What I'm concerned about is how he goes after everybody else. He goes after women. He goes after Muslims. He goes after immigrants. He goes after people with disabilities. He is hurting our unity at home. He is undermining the values that we stand for in New York. It's hurting us around the world. Hurting us around the world. Hurting us around the world.
It was you!
Hurting us around the world. I don't respond to Donald Trump and his string of insults. He can say whatever he wants to say about me. I really could care less. I'm going to stay focused on the issues because there are stark differences between where I think our country needs to be headed and where he would turn us back. I don't respond to Donald Trump and his string of insults and undermine the progress that we've been making. So when I talk about jobs, when I talk about climate change, when I talk about equal pay, when I talk about a woman's right to make her own health care decisions and so much else, I know that he doesn't believe any of that. I don't respond to Donald Trump and his string of insults and that in this campaign he wants to set Americans against each other, and I'm not going to stand for it.
I need some angry, flocking birds. You hear me? Now who's angry?
I did not primarily conduct business on email with officials in our government. And I made it a practice to send emails that were work-related to people on their government accounts. I did not primarily conduct business on email with officials in our government. And I made it a practice to send emails that were work-related to people on their government accounts. I did not primarily conduct business on email. And I made it a practice.
I did not primarily conduct business on email. And I made it a practice. I did not. And I made it a practice. I did not primarily conduct business on email. And I made it a practice.
Okay, and who else was at your home? Were you alone?
I was alone, yes.
The whole night?
Well, yes, the whole night.
Well, I don't know why that's funny. Okay, and who else was at your home? Were you alone?
I was alone, yes.
The whole night?
Well, yes, the whole night.
Well, I don't know why that's funny.
That's important for all of us, but it's particularly important for our young people. Because I want you to have the same confidence and optimism about our future that prior generations of Americans have had.
This investigation began as a referral from the Intelligence Community Inspector General in connection with Secretary Clinton's use of a personal email server during her time as Secretary of State. The referral focused on whether classified information was transmitted on that personal system. Our investigation looked at whether there is evidence that classified information was improperly stored or transmitted on that personal system in violation of a federal statute that makes it a felony to mishandle classified information, either intentionally or in a grossly negligent way. FBI investigators also read all of the approximately 30,000 emails that Secretary Clinton provided to the State Department in 2014. From the group of 30,000 emails returned to the State Department in 2014, 110 emails in 52 email chains have been determined by the owning agency to contain classified information at the time they were sent or received. 8 of those chains contained information that was top secret at the time they were sent. 36 of those chains contained secret information at the time, and 8 contained confidential information at the time. Our investigation looked at whether there is evidence that classified information was improperly stored or transmitted on that personal system in violation of a federal statute that makes it a felony to mishandle classified information, either intentionally or in a grossly negligent way. Separate from those, about 2,000 additional emails were upclassified to make them confidential. Those emails had not been classified at the time that they were sent. There is evidence to support a conclusion that any reasonable person in Secretary Clinton's position or in the position of those with whom she was corresponding about those matters should have known that an unclassified system was no place for that conversation. Even if information is not marked classified in an email, participants who know or should know that the subject matter is classified are still obligated to protect it. The FBI also discovered several thousand work-related emails that were not among the group of 30,000 emails returned by Secretary Clinton to State in 2014. Agencies have concluded that 3 of those were classified at the time they were sent or received, 1 at the secret level and 2 at the confidential level. There is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information. For example, 7 email chains concern matters that were classified at the top secret special access program at the time they were sent. Those chains involve Secretary Clinton both sending emails about those matters and receiving emails about those same matters. There is evidence to support a conclusion that any reasonable person in Secretary Clinton's position or in the position of those with whom she was corresponding about those matters should have known that an unclassified system was no place for that conversation. In addition to this highly sensitive information, we also found information that was properly classified as secret by the U.S. intelligence community at the time it was discussed on email. That is, excluding any later up-classified emails. None of these emails should have been on any kind of unclassified system, but their presence is especially concerning because all of these emails were housed on unclassified personal servers, not even supported by full-time security staff like those found at agencies and departments of the United States government, or even with a commercial email service like Gmail. All the cases prosecuted involved some combination of clearly intentional and willful mishandling of classified information, or vast quantities of information exposed in such a way as to support an inference of intentional misconduct, or indications of disloyalty to the United States or efforts to obstruct justice. Our investigation looked at whether there is evidence that classified information was improperly stored or transmitted on that personal system in violation of a federal statute that makes it a felony. She also used her personal email extensively while outside the United States, including sending and receiving work-related emails in the territory of sophisticated adversaries. Our investigation looked at whether there is evidence that classified information was improperly stored or transmitted on that personal system in violation of a federal statute that makes it a felony to mishandle classified information, either intentionally or in a grossly negligent way. Although the Department of Justice makes final decisions on matters like this, we are expressing to Justice our view that no charges are appropriate in this case.
Well, if you ever plan to motor west, you better take my way. The highway, that's the best. Get your kicks on Route 66. It winds from Chicago to LA. More than 2,000 miles on.
It's time to move on.
It's time to move on. It's time to move on.
It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again, Senator.
The question, if you couldn't hear it, was about the committee report on Benghazi that was released today. And I have said from the very beginning, nothing is more important than the safety and security of our diplomats and development officials who go into dangerous places around the world.
What difference at this point does it make?
Pursuing American values, interests, and our security. And I said this when I testified for 11 hours.
The fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
And we owe it to those brave Americans to make sure that we learn the right lessons from this tragedy. I understand that after more than 2 years and $7 million spent by the Benghazi Committee out of taxpayer funds, it had to today report it had found nothing to contradict the conclusions of the Independent Accountability Board or the conclusions of the prior multiple earlier investigations. The best way to honor the commitment and sacrifice of those we lost is to redouble our efforts to provide the resources and support that our diplomats deserve. I'll leave it to others to characterize this report, but I think it's pretty clear it's time to move on. It's time to move on. It's time to move on. It's time to move on.
It's time to move on.
It's time to move on.
Get your kicks on Route 66. Get your kicks on Route 66.
It's time to move on. It's time to move on. It's time to move on.
Landmark rulings from the Supreme Court on immigration and affirmative action. In a 4-4 split decision, the Supreme Court basically blocked President Obama's immigration executive orders. The president's plan would have protected millions of illegal immigrants from deportation and given them permits to work legally in the United States.
Leaving the broken system the way it is, that's factually incorrect. That's not a solution. In fact, that's the real amnesty, pretending we can deport 11 million people. That's factually incorrect. Or build a wall without spending tens of billions of dollars of taxpayer money. That's factually incorrect. What is really just factually incorrect. We don't have to wall ourselves off from those who may not look like us right now or pray like we do or have a different last name. That's factually incorrect, because being an American is about something more than that. Republicans in Congress currently are willfully preventing the Supreme Court from being fully staffed. That's factually incorrect and functioning as our founders intended. That's factually incorrect, and today's situation underscores the degree to which the court is not able to function the way it's supposed to. That's factually incorrect.
It is undisputed that a significant number of your emails were to or from a Sidney Blumenthal. Now, he did not work for the State Department. He didn't work for the U.S. government at all. He wanted to work for the State Department, but the White House said no to him. Do you recall who specifically at the White House rejected Sidney Blumenthal?
No, I do not.
After he was turned down for a job at the State Department by the White House, he went to work where?
I think he had a number of consulting contracts with different entities.
Well, if he had a number of them, do you recall any of them?
I know that he did some work for my husband.
Well, he worked for the Clinton Foundation.
That's correct.
Okay. He worked for Media Matters.
I'm sure he did.
He worked for Correct the Record.
I'm sure he did.
When you were asked about Sidney Blumenthal, you said he was an old friend who sent you unsolicited emails, which you passed on in some instances because you wanted to hear from people outside what you called the bubble. Loved to send you political and image advice, had business interests in Libya, which he not only alerted you to, but solicited your help for, was coming from. What does the word unsolicited mean to you?
It means that I did not ask him to send me the information that he sent me, and some of it I found interesting, some of it I did not, some of it I forwarded, some of it I did not. I did not know anything about any business interests. I thought that just as I said previously, newspaper articles, journalists, of which he is one, a former journalist, had some interesting insights. And so we took them on board and evaluated them, and some were helpful and others were not.
We're going to get to all the points you just made, but I want to start with your public comment that these emails were unsolicited.
It means that I did not ask him to send me the information that he sent me.
You wrote to him, "Another keeper, thanks, and please keep them coming."
It means that I did not ask him to send me the information that he sent me.
Greetings from Kabul, and thanks for keeping this stuff coming. Any other info about it? Question mark.
It means that I did not ask him to send me the information that he sent me.
What are you hearing now? Question mark.
It means that I did not ask him to send me the information that he sent me.
Got it. We'll follow up tomorrow. Anything else to convey? Question mark. Now that one is interesting because that was the very email where Mr. Blumenthal was asking you to intervene on behalf of a business deal that he was pursuing in Libya.
I did not know anything about any business interests.
Had business interests in Libya, which he not only alerted you to, but solicited your help for.
So,
what did you mean by what are you hearing now?
I have no idea, Congressman. Obviously, I did respond to some of them.
Well,
and I'm sure that
anything
encouraged him.
Anything else to convey? What are you hearing now? I'm going to Paris tomorrow night. We'll meet with TNC leaders, so this and additional info useful. Still don't have electricity or BlackBerry coverage post-Irene, so I've had to resort to my new iPad. Let me know if you received this.
It means that I did not ask him to send me the information that he sent me.
That's an email from him to you. This report is in part a response to your questions. There'll be further information in the next day. If you're the one asking him for information, how does that square with the definition of unsolicited?
It means that I did not ask him to send me the information that he sent me.
I'm going to get to that in a second. Now, before you give Mr. Blumenthal too much credit, you agree he didn't write a single one of those cables or memos he sent you.
I'm sorry, what?
He didn't write a single one of those cables or memos.
I don't know who wrote them. He's the one who sent them to me.
Would you be surprised to know not a single one of those was from him?
I don't know where he got the information that he was sending to me.
Did you ask? You're sending me very specific, detailed intelligence. What is your source? That seems to me like a pretty good question.
Join the president and stand up to them. I'm with him, and he wants to make sure gun manufacturers can finally be held accountable when their guns are used to kill our children.
It's not only our men and women in uniform who serve our country, it's their families, their spouses, their children, and we are grateful to each and every one of them. And all of the other electeds and service members, active duty and retired, National Guard and reservists, veterans, military, spouses, family members, all who are with us today. We honor the sacrifice of those who died for our country in many ways. And a strong, confident America that leads to keep our country safe and our economy growing. As Secretary of State, Senator, and First Lady, I had the honor of representing America abroad. As a candidate for president, there's nothing I take more seriously than our national security. I've offered clear strategies for how to defeat ISIS. Americans aren't just electing a president in November. We're choosing our next commander-in-chief, the person we count on to decide questions of war and peace, life and death. And like many across our country and around the world, I believe the person the Republicans have nominated for president, Donald Trump, can do the job. And I'm just unprepared, temperamentally unfit to hold an office that requires knowledge, stability, and immense responsibility. He praises Vladimir Putin and picks fights with our friends, including the British Prime Minister, the Mayor of London, the German Chancellor, the President of Mexico, and the Pope. Those are the words, my friends, of someone who doesn't understand America or the world. I'd be doing everything I could to make sure Donald Trump never becomes president, because I believe he will take our country down a truly dangerous path. Unlike him, I have some experience with the tough calls and the hard work of statecraft, and stood up for the rights of women, religious minorities, and LGBT people around the world. I have sat in the Situation Room and advised the president on some of the toughest choices he faced. So I'm not new to this work, and I'm proud to run on my record, because I think the choice before the American people in this election is clear. And if America doesn't lead, we leave a vacuum, and that will either cause chaos or other countries will rush in to fill the void. Then they'll be the ones making the decisions about your lives and jobs and safety, and trust me, the choices they make will not be to our benefit. We need to be strong at home. That means investing in our infrastructure, education, and innovation, the fundamentals of a strong economy. And it's also the legacy of American troops who fought and died to secure those bonds, because they knew we were safer with friends and partners. We're lucky to have two friendly neighbors on our land borders. Why would he want to make one of them an enemy? But there is no question that the world and the United States, we are safer now than we were before. He also refused to rule out nuclear weapons against ISIS, which would mean mass civilian casualties. Our troops give their all. They deserve a commander-in-chief who knows that. Trump says over and over again, the world is laughing at us. He's been saying this for decades. He didn't just start this year. He bought full-page ads in newspapers across America back in 1987 when Ronald Reagan was president, saying that America lacked a backbone and the world was, you guessed it, laughing at us.
So?
And you've got to wonder why somebody who fundamentally has so little confidence in America and has felt that way for at least 30 years wants to be our president.
So?
Because if you're convinced you're always right, you'll never ask yourself the hard questions.
So?
Well, I have a lot of faith that the American people will make the right decision. This is a country with a deep reservoir of common sense and national pride.
Lately, I've been thinking about the way things might have been. And lately, I've been sinking, and it's hard to get back up again. So if I see
I hate seeing President Obama today saying that Iran has violated our agreement. I mean, what did he think? He's now complaining about Iran violating the agreement. What the hell did he think? He's like a baby. He's like a baby. Now, can you imagine? I mean, the agreement's 2 seconds old. This guy, the ink isn't even dry. Today, I hear Obama is very unhappy with Iran because he feels that they haven't lived up to the spirit of the agreement. What the hell did he think was going to happen? They defaulted on day one. I mean, they were doing things on day one, and everyone was telling him, he said, that can't be possible. That's the way life works. These are vicious people. The saddest part of that deal is so much of this money is already gone. Just gone. $150 billion right out the tubes. And what do we get? We got nothing. We got nothing. They got the money, and the prisoners should have been released years ago before we started negotiating.
Mr. Trump. First of all, for the record, I'm a state representative from New Hampshire, 10 years on the Veterans Affairs Committee, 22 years in the Marine Corps, retired First Sergeant. What I want to clarify here, first of all, I would never, ever in a million years put my name on a candidate that did not, from his heart, look me in the eye and tell me he's concerned about veterans. That's Donald Trump. I met him over a year ago. I've been involved with many fundraisers. There are many scam artists out there. He did the right thing by vetting these groups there. If you look at some of the groups, they're giving 20 cents, 40 cents on the dollar, and they're spending the rest for, their, nice lavish trips. He gave 100%. The liberal media is the only ones that have been calling me on the foundation. All right, I'm the former chairman. I've been dealing with this stuff for years as a veterans activist. Stop using veterans as political pawns. You got a guy outside McCoy. Go do a Google search on his Facebook. He's out there, his pictures with Clinton. They are using veterans as political pawns. It must stop. Donald Trump is doing this for the heart. You're all focused on the way he's raising money, and you're not looking at the 22 veterans that are killing each other every day. You're not concerned about the thousands of veterans that are on wait lists. Look at his plan on his Trump's website. He talks about medical cards. He talks about fixing the VA. He talks about competition. I think the liberal media, and I've been dealing with you a long time, you need to get your head out of your butt, focus on the real issues. Thank you.
Last week we came out. Group of veterans of all sides of the political spectrum to stand up to Donald Trump and tell him to stop using veterans as political props.
I'm out here because as a Marine Corps officer, I'm opposed to everything Donald Trump stands for. He's used irresponsible and hateful rhetoric for his agenda, and he's used veterans as props for that hate. And rhetoric
She wasn't nice, and you think I'm going to change? I'm not changing, including with her. Go ahead.
Bob Dole said you should apologize.
Bob Dole is a fan of mine. Bob Dole endorsed me, so don't tell me about Bob Dole.
So I think you've set a new bar today for being contentious with the press corps, kind of calling us losers to our faces and all that.
No, not all of you, just many of you.
All right, fine. Enough of us. Is this what,
not you, David?
Is this what it's going to be like covering you and your president?
Yeah, it is. Let me tell you something. I'm a person. Okay, yeah, it is going to be like this, David. When I raise $5.6 million as of today, more is coming in, and this is going to phenomenal groups, and I have many of these people vetting the people that are getting the money and working hard, and then we have to read probably libelous stories, or certainly close, in the newspapers, and the people know the stories are false. I'm going to continue to attack the press. Look, I find the press to be extremely dishonest. I find the political press to be unbelievably dishonest. I will say that.
Dear fellow citizen, this guide tries to provide you with some practical advice that may be useful to you in case you have made the difficult decision to seek new work opportunities outside of your own country. The safe way to enter another country is by first obtaining your passport, which is issued by the delegations of the Secretariat of Foreign Relations, and your visa, which you request at the embassy or consulate of the country to where you wish to travel. However, we actually see many cases of Mexicans who try to cross the northern border without the necessary documentation. Embrace Mexico. It's your home, fellow countryman. This Consular Protection Guide is not promoting the crossing of the border of Mexicans without legal documentation required by the government of the United States. Its objective is to make known the risks implied and to inform about the rights of migrants regardless of their legal residence.
Trump likes to say, I'm playing the woman card. Well, you know what I say? If fighting for equal pay and paid family leave and raising the minimum wage and affordable child care is playing the woman card, then deal me in. Hear this, because you need to tell your friends. He's hired union busters to break up organizing campaigns on the properties that he owns. What little we know of his economic policies would be running up our debt, starting trade wars, letting Wall Street run wild. All of that could cause another crash and devastate working families and our country. Trump economics is a recipe for lower wages, fewer jobs, more debt. He could bankrupt America like he's bankrupted his companies. How can anybody lose money running a casino, really? And that's not all. I hear every day from families who are afraid of what a Donald Trump presidency would mean. For millions of immigrants living and working in America. 16 million people in America are part of what's called mixed status families, where some loved ones are citizens and some aren't. Maybe the children were born here, but one or both parents are undocumented. I'm sure some of you have families like that. And these are not just statistics, are they? We're talking about real people, men, women, and children. We're talking about neighbors, co-workers, and friends. A few months ago in Las Vegas, I met a 10-year-old girl named Carla Ortiz. She started to cry as she told me that her parents had a letter of deportation, and she was scared they would be taken away from her. In a lot of ways, Carla is a typical bright fifth grader. She loves science experiments, math, and Charlotte's Web. But she leaves for school every day terrified that her mom and dad, who are working hard to support their family, won't be there when she gets home. Her parents had to take her to a heart specialist who explained that living in constant fear was making her little heart beat dangerously fast. So when Donald Trump talks about deporting 11 million immigrants, he's talking about ripping apart families like Carla's. He's talking about sending a deportation force to schools, workplaces, and homes to round up moms, dads, grandparents, even children. When he talks about ending birthright citizenship, he's talking about kicking children who are born here out of the only country they know. And when he calls immigrants rapists and murderers, he's talking about families like Carla's and many of yours.
Estas gentes, muchos de ellos son hasta gente que andaban en las pandillas en Estados Unidos.
Frente a esa falta de oportunidades para esa población joven, se están convirtiendo en la reserva de mano de obra barata para el crimen organizado, de que nadie les va a dar empleo.
Por la noche llega un grupo de americanos que vienen a hacer labor social y les traen otra vez comida. Esta gente no se preocupa por comer, se preocupa por obtener dinero para la droga que consumen, porque la mayoría ya son adictos.
Yo creo que dentro del canal, yo creo que más del 90% es usuario de drogas inyectables, pero el 100% consume drogas. Reducción del daño, que incluye intercambio de jeringas. Ahorita lo que nosotros vamos a llevarles es
cuando es nueva no sientes piquete, pero cuando es así ya viejita como y ya se achata el filo, pues ya batalla para que entres en tu piel, y para que pique la vena a veces nomás la empuja, porque ya está chata, pues ya no la traspasa así rápido, la empuja nomás.
O sea, ni entra la
vena. Tienes que meter recio.
We have to reject this wrong vision for America with a strong, clear voice. We have to stand up for hardworking American families, and that includes hardworking immigrant families. Mom and dad should be preparing their kids for their futures, not for the possibility that they could be hauled away at any moment. In my first 100 days as president, I will introduce comprehensive immigration reform. I will build on President Obama's executive actions and keep going.
the way things might have been. Now lately, I've been sinking, and it's hard to get back up again. So if I seem a little distant and preoccupied, just know that little spark in me ain't died. I wanted money, I wanted fame, I wanted every swinging Richard to know my name. I wanted time, I wanted space, I wanted to have the world's most recognized face. But then I wouldn't have you standing here with me. So maybe I'm satisfied, so maybe I'm satisfied. I wanted money, I wanted fame, I wanted every swinging Richard to know my name. I wanted time, I wanted space, I wanted to have the world's most recognized face. But then I wouldn't have you standing here with me. Hey baby, I'm satisfied. That's right, baby.
Good morning. Welcome, Madam Secretary. Welcome to each of you. This is a public hearing of the Benghazi Select Committee. Just a couple of quick administrative matters before we start, Madam Secretary. There are predetermined breaks, but I want to make it absolutely clear we can take a break for any reason or for no reason. If you or anyone would just simply alert me, then we will take a break, and it can be for any reason or for no reason. To our guests, we are happy to have you here. The witness deserves to hear the questions, and the members deserve to hear the answers. So proper decorum must be observed at all times. No reaction to questions or answers. No disruptions. Some committees take an incremental approach to decorum. I do not. This is your one and only notice. Madam Secretary, the ranking member and I will give opening statements, and then you will be recognized for your opening statement, and then after that, the members will alternate from one side to the other. And because you have already been sworn, we will go straight to your opening. So I will now recognize myself, and then recognize Mr. Cummings, and then you, Madam Secretary. Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Glenn Doherty, and Tyrone Woods served this country with courage and with honor. And they were killed under circumstances that most of us could never imagine. Terrorists pour through the front gate of an American facility, attacking people and property with machine guns, mortars, and fire. It is important that we remember how these 4 men died. It is equally important that we remember how these 4 men lived and why. They were more than 4 images on a television screen. They were husbands and fathers and sons and brothers and family and friends. They were Americans who believed in service and sacrifice. Many people speak wistfully of a better world, but do little about it. These four went out and actually tried to make it better. And it cost them their lives. So we know what they gave us. What do we owe them? Justice for those that killed them. We owe their families our everlasting gratitude, respect. We owe them and each other the truth. The truth about why we were in Libya. The truth about what we were doing in Libya. The truth about the escalating violence in Libya before we were attacked and these four men were killed. The truth about requests for additional security. The truth about requests for additional personnel. The truth about requests for additional equipment. The truth about where and why our military was positioned as it was on the anniversary of 9/11. The truth about what was happening and being discussed in Washington while our people were under attack. The truth about what led to the attacks and the truth about what our government told the American people after the attacks. Why were there so many requests for more security personnel and equipment, and why were those requests denied in Washington? Why did the State Department, compound and facility, not even come close to meeting proper security specifications? What policies were we pursuing in Libya that required a physical presence in spite of the escalating violence? Who in Washington was aware of the escalating violence? What precautions, if any, were taken on the anniversary of 9/11? What happened in Washington after the first attack, and what was our response to that attack? What did the military do or not do? What did our leaders in Washington do or not do, and when? Why was the American public given such divergent accounts of what caused these attacks? And why is it so hard to get information from the very government these four men represented, served, and sacrificed for? Even after an accountability review board and a half dozen congressional investigations, these and other questions still lingered. And these questions lingered because previous investigations were not thorough. These questions lingered because those previous investigations were narrow in scope and either incapable or unwilling to access the facts and evidence necessary to answer all relevant questions. So the House of Representatives, including some Democrats, I hasten to add, asked this committee to write the final definitive accounting of what happened in Benghazi. This committee is the first committee to review more than 50,000 pages of documents because we insisted that they be produced. This committee is the first committee to demand access to more eyewitnesses because serious investigations talk to as many eyewitnesses as possible. This committee is the first committee to thoroughly and individually interview scores of other witnesses, many of them for the first time. This committee is the first committee to review thousands of pages of documents from top State Department personnel. This committee is the first committee to demand access to relevant documents from the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Defense, and even the White House. This committee is the first committee to demand access to the emails to and from Ambassador Chris Stevens. How could an investigation possibly be considered serious without reviewing the emails of the person most knowledgeable about Libya? This committee is the first committee, the only committee, to uncover the fact that Secretary Clinton exclusively used personal email on her own personal server for official business and kept the public record, including emails about Benghazi and Libya, in her own custody and control for almost 2 years after she left office. You will hear a lot today about the Accountability Review Board. Secretary Clinton has mentioned it more than 70 times in her previous testimony before Congress. But when you hear about the ARB, you should also know the State Department leadership handpicked the members of the ARB. The ARB never interviewed Secretary Clinton. The ARB never reviewed her emails. And Secretary Clinton's top advisor was allowed to review and suggest changes to the ARB before the public ever saw it. There's no transcript of the ARB interviews, so it's impossible to know whether all relevant questions were asked and answered. And because there's no transcript, it is also impossible to cite the ARB interviews with any particularity at all. That is not independent. that is not accountability. That is not a serious investigation. You will hear there were previous congressional investigations into Benghazi, and that is true. And it should make you wonder why those investigations failed to interview so many witnesses and access so many documents. If those previous congressional investigations were really serious and thorough, how did they miss Ambassador Stevens' emails? If those previous investigations were serious and thorough, how did they miss Secretary Clinton's emails? If those congressional investigations really were serious and thorough, why did they fail to interview dozens of key State Department witnesses, including agents on the ground who experienced the attacks firsthand? Just last month, 3 years after Benghazi, top aides finally returned documents to the State Department. A month ago, this committee received 1,500 new pages of Secretary Clinton's emails related to Libya and Benghazi, 3 years after the attacks. And a little over 2 weeks ago, this committee received nearly 1,400 pages of Ambassador Stevens' emails, 3 years after the attacks. It is impossible to conduct a serious, fact-centric investigation without access to the documents from the former Secretary of State, the ambassador who knew more about Libya than anyone else, and testimony from witnesses who survived the attacks. Madam Secretary, I understand there are people, frankly, in both parties who have suggested that this investigation is about you. Let me assure you it is not, and let me assure you why it is not. This investigation is about 4 people who were killed representing our country on foreign soil. It is about what happened before, during, and after the attacks that killed them. It is about what this country owes to those who risk their lives to serve it. And it is about the fundamental obligation of government to tell the truth, always, to the people that it purports to represent. Madam Secretary, not a single member of this committee signed up to investigate you or your email. We signed up to investigate and therefore honor the lives of 4 people that we sent into a dangerous country to represent us, and to do everything we can to prevent it from happening to others. Our committee has interviewed 100 witnesses. Not a single one of them has been named Clinton until today. You were the Secretary of State for this country at all relevant times. So, of course, the committee is going to want to talk to you. You are an important witness. You are one important witness among 100 important witnesses. And I do understand you wanted to come sooner than today, so let me be clear why that did not happen. You had an unusual email arrangement, which meant the State Department could not produce your emails to us. You made exclusive use of personal email and a personal server. And when you left the State Department, you kept the public record to yourself for almost 2 years. And it was you and your attorneys who decided what to return and what to delete. Those decisions were your decisions, not our decisions. It was only in March of this year we learned of this email arrangement. And since we learned of this email arrangement, we have interviewed dozens of witnesses, only one of whom was solely related to your email arrangement. And that was the shortest interview of all, because that witness invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege against incrimination. Making sure the public record is complete is what serious investigations do, so it was important and remains important that this committee have access to all of Ambassador Stevens' emails, the emails of other senior leaders and witnesses, and it is important to gain access to all of your emails, Madam Secretary. Your emails are no less or no more important than the emails of anyone else. It just took us a little bit longer to get them, and it garnered a little more attention in the process. I want you to take note during this hearing how many times congressional Democrats call on this administration to make long-awaited documents available to us. They won't. Take note of how many witnesses congressional Democrats ask us to schedule for interview. They won't. We would be much closer to finding out what happened and writing the final definitive report if Democrats on this committee had helped us just a little bit pursue the facts. But if the Democrats on this committee had their way, dozens of witnesses never would have been interviewed. Your public record would still be private. Thousands of documents never would have been accessed. And we wouldn't have the emails of our own ambassador. That may be smart politics, but it is a lousy way to run a serious investigation. There are certain characteristics that make our country unique in the annals of history. We are the greatest experiment in self-governance the world has ever known. And part of that self-governance comes self-scrutiny, even of the highest officials. Our country is strong enough to handle the truth, and our fellow citizens expect us to pursue the truth wherever the facts take us. So this committee is going to do what we pledged to do and what should have been done, frankly, a long time ago, which is interview all relevant witnesses, examine all relevant evidence, and access all relevant documents. And we're going to pursue the truth in a manner worthy of the memory of the 4 people who lost their lives and worthy of the respect of our fellow citizens. And we are going to write that final definitive accounting of what happened in Benghazi. And we would like to do it with your help and the help of our Democrat colleagues, but make no mistake, we are going to do it nonetheless. Because understanding what happened in Benghazi goes to the heart of who we are as a country and the promises we make to those that we send into harm's way. They deserve the truth. They deserve the whole truth. They deserve nothing but the truth. The people we work for deserve the truth. The friends and family of the 4 who lost their lives deserve the truth. We're going to find the truth because there is no statute of limitations on the truth.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Madam Secretary, I want to thank you very much for being here today to testify before Congress on this very important issue. This is your 3rd time. This week, our chairman, Mr. Gowdy, was interviewed in a lengthy media profile. During his interview, he complained that he was, and I quote, he has an impossible job. That's what the chairman said, impossible job. He said it's impossible to conduct a serious, fact-centric investigation in such a, quote, political environment. I have great respect for the chairman, but on this score, he is absolutely wrong. In fact, it has been done by his own Republican colleagues in the House on this very issue, Benghazi. The Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee conducted an extensive, bipartisan, 2-year investigation and issued a detailed report. The Senate Intelligence Committee and the Senate Homeland Security Committee also conducted a bipartisan investigation. Those bipartisan efforts respected and honored the memories of the 4 brave Americans who gave their lives in Benghazi. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, and Glenn Doherty. The problem is that the Republican caucus did not like the answers they got from those investigations. So they set up this select committee with no rules, no deadline, and an unlimited budget. And they set them loose, Madam Secretary, because you're running for president. Clearly, it is possible to conduct a serious bipartisan investigation. What is impossible is for any reasonable person to continue denying that Republicans are squandering millions of taxpayer dollars on this abusive effort to derail Secretary Clinton's presidential campaign. In the chairman's interview, he tried to defend against this criticism by attempting to cast himself as the victim. And he complained about attacks on the credibility of the Select Committee. His argument would be more compelling if Republicans weren't leading the charge. As we all know, Representative Kevin McCarthy, Speaker Boehner's second in command and the chairman's close friend, admitted that they established the Select Committee to drive down Secretary Clinton's poll numbers. Democrats didn't say that. The second in command in the House said that, a Republican. Republican Congressman Richard Hanna said the Select Committee was, quote, designed to go after Secretary Clinton. And one of the chairman's own hand-picked investigators, a self-proclaimed conservative Republican, charged that he was fired in part for not going along with these plans to, quote, hyper-focus on Hillary Clinton, end of quote. These stark admissions reflect exactly what we have seen inside the Select Committee for the past year. Let's just take a look at the facts. Since January, Republicans have canceled every single hearing on our schedule for the entire year, except for this one, Secretary Clinton. They also canceled numerous interviews that they had planned with the Defense Department and the CIA officials. Instead of doing that, they said what they were going to do. Republicans zeroed in on Secretary Clinton, her speechwriters, her IT staffers, and her campaign officials. This is what the Republicans did, not the Democrats. When Speaker Boehner established this Select Committee, he justified it by arguing that it would, quote, cross jurisdictional lines. I assume he meant we would focus on more than just Secretary of State. But Madam Secretary, you're sitting there by yourself. The Secretary of Defense is not on your left. The Director of the CIA is not on your right. That's because Republicans abandoned their own plans to question those top officials. So instead of being cross-jurisdictional, Republicans just crossed them off the list. Last weekend, the chairman told the Republican colleagues to shut up and stop talking about the Select Committee. What I want to know is this, and this is a key question. Why tell the Republicans to shut up when they are telling the truth, but not when they are attacking Secretary Clinton with reckless accusations that are demonstrably false? Why not tell them to shut up then? Carly Fiorina has said that Secretary Clinton has blood on her hands. Mike Huckabee accused her of ignoring the warning calls from dying Americans in Benghazi. Senator Rand Paul said Benghazi was a 3 a.m. phone call that she never picked up. And Senator Lindsey Graham tweeted, "Where the hell were you on the night of the Benghazi attack?" Everyone on this panel knows these accusations are baseless, from our own investigation and all those before it. Yet, Republican members of this Select Committee remain silent. On Monday, the Democrats issued a report showing that none of the 54 witnesses the committee interviewed substantiated these wild Republican claims. Secretary Clinton did not order the military to stand down, and she neither approved nor denied requests for additional security. I ask that our report be included in the official record for today's hearing, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
What is so telling is that we issued virtually the same report a year ago. Same report. When we first joined the Select Committee, I asked my staff to put together a complete report and database setting forth the questions that have been asked about the attacks and all of the answers that were provided in the 8 previous investigations. I ask that this report also be included in the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
The problem is that rather than accepting these facts, Republicans continue to spin new conspiracy theories that are just as outlandish and inaccurate. For example, the chairman recently tried to argue that Sidney Blumenthal was Secretary Clinton's primary advisor on Libya. And this past Sunday, Representative Pompeo claimed on national television that Secretary Clinton relied on Sidney Blumenthal for most of her intelligence on Libya. Earlier this week, the Washington Post fact-checker awarded this claim 4 Pinocchios, its worst rating. Here's the bottom line. The Select Committee has spent 17 months and $4.7 million of taxpayer money. We've held 4 hearings and conducted 54 interviews and depositions. Yes, we have received some new emails from Secretary Clinton, Ambassador Stevens, and others. And yes, we have conducted some new interviews. But these documents and interviews do not show any nefarious activity. In fact, it's just the opposite. The new information we have obtained confirms and corroborates the core facts we already knew from 8 previous investigations. They provide more detail, but they do not change the basic conclusions. It is time now for the Republicans to end this taxpayer-funded fishing expedition. We need to come together and shift from politics to policy. That's what the American people want, shifting from politics to policy. We need to finally make good on our promises to the families. And the families only asked us to do 3 things. 1, do not make this a political football. 2, find the facts. 3, do everything in your power to make sure that this does not happen again. And so we need to start focusing on what we here in Congress can do to improve the safety and security of our diplomatic corps in the future. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair, thanks to the gentleman from Maryland. Madam Secretary, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, members of this committee. The terrorist attacks at our diplomatic compound and later at the CIA post in Benghazi, Libya on September 11, 2012, took the lives of 4 brave Americans, Ambassador Chris Stevens, Glenn Doherty, and Tyrone Woods. I'm here to honor the service of those 4 men, the courage of the Diplomatic Security Agency and the CIA officers who risked their lives that night, and the work their colleagues do every single day all over the world. I knew and admired Chris Stevens. He was one of our nation's most accomplished diplomats. Chris's mother liked to say that he had sand in his shoes because he was always moving, always working, especially in the Middle East that he came to know so well. When the revolution broke out in Libya, we named Chris as our envoy to the opposition. There was no easy way to get him into Benghazi to begin gathering information and meeting those Libyans who were rising up against the murderous dictator Gaddafi. But he found a way to get himself there on a Greek cargo ship, just like a 19th century American envoy. But his work was very much 21st century hard-nosed diplomacy. It is a testament to the relationships that he built in Libya that on the day following the awareness of his death, tens of thousands of Libyans poured into the streets in Benghazi. They held signs reading, "Thugs don't represent Benghazi or Islam. Sorry, people of America, this is not the behavior of our Islam or our prophet." Chris Stevens, a friend to all Libyans. Although I didn't have the privilege of meeting Sean Smith personally, he was a valued member of our State Department family. An Air Force veteran, he was an information management officer who had served in Pretoria, Baghdad, Montreal, and The Hague. Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty worked for the CIA. They were killed by mortar fire at the CIA's outpost in Benghazi, a short distance from the diplomatic compound. They were both former Navy SEALs and trained paramedics with distinguished records of service, including in Iraq and Afghanistan. As Secretary of State, I had the honor to lead and the responsibility to support nearly 70,000 diplomats and development experts across the globe. Losing any one of them, as we did in Iraq, Afghanistan, Mexico, Haiti, and Libya, during my tenure was deeply painful for our entire State Department and USAID family, and for me personally. I was the one who asked Chris to go to Libya as our envoy. I was the one who recommended him to be our ambassador to the president. After the attacks, I stood next to President Obama as Marines carried his casket and those of the other 3 Americans off the plane at Andrews Air Force Base. I took responsibility. And as part of that, before I left office, I launched reforms to better protect our people in the field and help reduce the chance of another tragedy happening in the future. What happened in Benghazi has been scrutinized by a nonpartisan, hard-hitting accountability review board, 7 prior congressional investigations, multiple news organizations, and of course, our law enforcement and intelligence agencies. So today, I would like to share 3 observations about how we can learn from this tragedy and move forward as a nation. First, America must lead in a dangerous world, and our diplomats must continue representing us in dangerous places. The State Department sends people to more than 270 posts in 170 countries around the world. Chris Stevens understood that diplomats must operate in many places where our soldiers do not, where there are no other boots on the ground, and safety is far from guaranteed. In fact, he volunteered for just those assignments. He also understood we will never prevent every act of terrorism or achieve perfect security, and that we inevitably must accept a level of risk to protect our country and advance our interests and values. And make no mistake, the risks are real. Terrorists have killed more than 65 American diplomatic personnel since the 1970s, and more than 100 contractors and locally employed staff. Since 2001, there have been more than 100 attacks on U.S. diplomatic facilities around the world. But if you ask our most experienced ambassadors, they'll tell you they can't do their jobs for us from bunkers. It would compound the tragedy of Benghazi if Chris Stevens' death and the death of the other 3 Americans ended up undermining the work to which he and they devoted their lives. We have learned the hard way, when America is absent, especially from unstable places, there are consequences. Extremism takes root, aggressors seek to fill the vacuum, and security everywhere is threatened, including here at home. That's why Chris was in Benghazi. It's why he had served previously in Syria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Jerusalem during the Second Intifada. Nobody knew the dangers of Libya better. A weak government, extremist groups, rampant instability. But Chris chose to go to Benghazi because he understood America had to be represented there at that pivotal time. He knew that eastern Libya was where the revolution had begun and that unrest there could derail the country's fragile transition to democracy. And if extremists gained a foothold, they would have the chance to destabilize the entire region, including Egypt and Tunisia. He also knew how urgent it was to ensure that the weapons Gaddafi had left strewn across the country, including shoulder-fired missiles that could knock an airplane out of the sky, did not fall into the wrong hands. The nearest Israeli airport is just a day's drive from the Libyan border. Above all, Chris understood that most people in Libya or anywhere reject the extremists' argument that violence can ever be a path to dignity or justice. That's what those thousands of Libyans were saying after they learned of his death. And he understood there was no substitute for going beyond the embassy walls and doing the hard work of building relationships. Retreat from the world is not an option. America cannot shrink from our responsibility to lead. That doesn't mean we should ever return to the go-it-alone foreign policy of the past, a foreign policy that puts boots on the ground as a first choice rather than a last resort. Quite the opposite. We need creative, confident leadership that harnesses all of America's strengths and values. Leadership that integrates and balances the tools of diplomacy, development, and defense. And at the heart of that effort must be dedicated professionals like Chris Stevens and his colleagues, who put their lives on the line for a country, our country, because they believed, as I do, that America is the greatest force for peace and progress the world has ever known. My second observation is this: we have a responsibility to provide our diplomats with the resources and support they need to do their jobs as safely and effectively as possible. After previous deadly attacks, leaders from both parties and both branches of government came together to determine what went wrong and how to fix it for the future. That's what happened during the Reagan administration. When Hezbollah attacked our embassy and killed 63 people, including 17 Americans. And then in a later attack, attacked our Marine barracks and killed so many more. Those two attacks in Beirut resulted in the deaths of 258 Americans. It's what happened during the Clinton administration when Al-Qaeda bombed our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing more than 200 people, wounding more than 2,000 people, and killing 12 Americans. And it's what happened during the Bush administration after 9/11. Part of America's strength is we learn, we adapt, and we get stronger. After the Benghazi attacks, I asked Ambassador Thomas Pickering, one of our most distinguished and longest-serving diplomats, along with Admiral Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff appointed by President George W. Bush, to lead an accountability review board. This is an institution that the Congress set up after the terrible attacks in Beirut. There have been 18 previous accountability review boards. Only 2 have ever made any of their findings public. The one following the attacks on our embassies in East Africa, and the one following the attack on Benghazi. The Accountability Review Board did not pull a single punch. They found systemic problems and management deficiencies in 2 State Department bureaus. And the review board recommended 29 specific improvements. I pledged that by the time I left office, every one would be on the way to implementation. And they were. More Marines were slated for deployment to high-threat embassies. Additional diplomatic security agents were being hired and trained. And Secretary Kerry has continued this work. But there is more to do, and no administration can do it alone. Congress has to be our partner, as it has been after previous tragedies. For example, the Accountability Review Board and subsequent investigations have recommended improved training for our officers before they deploy to the field. But efforts to establish a modern joint training center are being held up by Congress. The men and women who serve our country deserve better. Finally, there is one more observation I'd like to share. I traveled to 112 countries as Secretary of State. Every time I did, I felt great pride and honor representing the country that I love. We need leadership at home to match our leadership abroad. Leadership that puts national security ahead of politics and ideology. Our nation has a long history of bipartisan cooperation on foreign policy and national security. Not that we always agree, far from it, but we do come together when it counts. As Secretary of State, I worked with the Republican chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to pass a landmark nuclear arms control treaty with Russia. I worked with the Republican leader, Senator Mitch McConnell, to open up Burma, now Myanmar, to democratic change. I know it's possible to find common ground because I have done it. We should debate on the basis of fact, not fear. We should resist denigrating the patriotism or loyalty of those with whom we disagree. So I'm here, Despite all the previous investigations and all the talk about partisan agendas, I'm here to honor those we lost and to do what I can to aid those who serve us still. My challenge to you, members of this committee, is the same challenge I put to myself. Let's be worthy of the trust the American people have bestowed upon us. They expect us to lead, to learn the right lessons, to rise above partisanship, and to reach for statesmanship. That's what I try to do every day as Secretary of State, and it's what I hope we will all strive for here today and into the future. Thank you.
Get hip to this kindly tale, then you're gonna make that California dream. Woo, come on, baby, get your kicks.
And with that, I would recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Roscoe.
Good morning, Secretary Clinton. Jake Sullivan, your chief foreign policy advisor, wrote a TikTok on Libya memo on August 21st, 2011, and this was the day before the rebels took Tripoli. He titles it, quote, Secretary Clinton's Leadership on Libya, in which he describes you as, quote, a critical voice and, quote, the public face of the U.S. effort in Libya and instrumental in tightening the noose around Gaddafi and his regime. But that didn't come easy, did it? Because you faced considerable opposition, and I can pause while you're reading your notes from your staff.
One thing at a time, Congressman. Thanks.
That didn't come easy, did it? That leadership role and that public face and so forth that I just mentioned?
No, this is an issue that the committee has raised, and it really boils down to why were we in Libya? Why did the United States join with our NATO and European allies, join with our Arab partners to protect the people of Libya against the murderous planning of Gaddafi? Why did we take a role alongside our partners in doing so? There were a number of reasons for that, and I think it is important to remind the American people where we were at the time when the people of Libya, like people across the region, rose up demanding freedom and democracy, a chance to chart their own futures. And Gaddafi threatened them with genocide, with hunting them down like cockroaches. And we were then approached by, with great intensity, our closest allies in Europe. People who felt very strongly, the French and the British, but others as well, that they could not stand idly by and permit that to happen so close to their shores with the unintended consequences that they worried about. And they asked for the United States to help. We did not immediately say yes. We did an enormous amount of due diligence in meeting with not only our European and Arab partners, but also with those who were heading up what was called the Transitional National Council. And we had experienced diplomats who were digging deep into what was happening in Libya and what the possibilities were before we agreed to provide very specific, limited help to the European and Arab efforts. We did not put one American soldier on the ground. We did not have one casualty. And in fact, I think by many measures, the cooperation between NATO and Arab forces was quite remarkable and something that we want to learn more lessons from.
Secretary Clinton, you were meeting with opposition within the State Department from very senior career diplomats, in fact, and they were saying that it was going to produce a net negative for U.S. military intervention. For example, in a March 9th, 2011 email discussing what has become known as the Libya Options Memo, Ambassador Stephen Mull, then the Executive Secretary of the State Department, and one of the top career diplomats, said this: in the case of our diplomatic history, when we've provided material or tactical military support to people seeking to drive their leaders from power, no matter how just their cause, it's tended to produce net negatives for our interests over the long term in those countries. Now, we'll come back to that in a minute, but You overruled those career diplomats. I mean, they report to you, and you're the chief diplomat of the United States. Go ahead and read the note if you need to.
I have to.
I'm not done with my question. I'm just giving you the courtesy of reading your notes.
That's all right.
All right. They were pushing back, but you overcame those objections. But then you had another big obstacle, didn't you? And that was the White House itself. There were senior voices within the White House that were opposed to military action. Vice President Biden, Department of Defense, Secretary Gates, the National Security Council, and so forth. But you persuaded President Obama to intervene militarily. Isn't that right?
Well, Congressman, I think it's important to point out there were many in the State Department who believed it was very much in America's interests and in furtherance of our values to protect the Libyan people, to join with our European allies and our Arab partners. The ambassador, who had to be withdrawn from Libya because of direct attack or direct threats to his physical safety, but who knew Libya very well, Ambassador Kretz, was a strong advocate for doing what we could to assist the Europeans and the Arabs. I think it's fair to say there were concerns and there were varying opinions about what to do, how to do it, and the like. At the end of the day, this was the president's decision, and all of us fed in our views. I did not favor it until I had done, as I said, the due diligence, speaking with not just people within our government and within the governments of all of the other nations who were urging us to assist them, but also meeting in person with the gentleman who had assumed a lead role in the Transitional National Council. So it is, of course, fair to say this was a difficult decision. I wouldn't sit here and say otherwise, and there were varying points of view about it. But at the end of the day, in large measure, because of the strong appeals from our European allies, the Arab League passing a resolution urging that the United States and NATO join with them, those were unprecedented requests. And we did decide, in recommending to the President, that there was a way to do it. The President, I think, very clearly had a limited instruction about how to proceed. And the first planes that flew were French planes. And I think what the United States provided was some of our unique capacity. But the bulk of the work militarily was done by Europeans and Arabs.
Well, I think you're underselling yourself. You got the State Department on board, you convinced the President, you overcame the objections of Vice President Biden and Secretary of Defense Gates, the National Security Council, and you had another obstacle then, and that was the United Nations. And you were able to persuade the Russians, of all things, to abstain, and had you not been successful in arguing that abstention, the Security Council Resolution 1973 wouldn't have passed because the Russians had a veto. So you overcame that obstacle as well. Isn't that right?
Well, Congressman, it is right that after doing my due diligence and reviewing the various options and the potential consequences of pursuing each of them, I was in favor of the United States joining with our European allies and our Arab partners, and I also was in favor of obtaining UN Security Council support because I thought that would provide greater legitimacy. In that, of course, our ambassador to the UN was very influential and successful in making the case to her colleagues. But this was at the behest of and the direction of the President once he was presented with the varying arguments.
And you presented
Congressman,
the argument.
I have been in a number of Situation Room discussions. I remember very well the very intense conversation over whether or not to launch the Navy SEALs against the compound we thought in Abbottabad that might house bin Laden. There was a split in the advisors around the President. Eventually, the President makes the decision. I supported doing what we could to support our European and Arab partners in their effort on a humanitarian basis, a strategic basis, to prevent Gaddafi from launching and carrying out mass massacres.
There was another obstacle that you overcame, and that was the Arabs themselves. Jake Sullivan sent you an email, and he said this: I think you should call. It will be painful 10 minutes, but you will be the one who delivered Arab support. And that's a Jake Sullivan email of March 17th to you, asking you to call the Secretary General of the Arab League. So to put this in totality, you were able to overcome opposition within the State Department. You were able to persuade the President. You were able to persuade the United Nations and the international community. You made the call to the Arabs and brought them home. You saw it, you drove it, you articulated it, and you persuaded people. Did I get that wrong?
Well, Congressman, I was the Secretary of State. My job was to conduct the diplomacy, and the diplomacy consisted of a long series of meetings and phone calls, both here in our country and abroad, to take the measure of what people were saying and whether they meant it. We had heard sometimes before from countries saying, well, the United States should go do this. And when we'd say, well, what will you do in support of us? There was not much coming forth. This time, if they wanted us to support them in what they saw as an action vital to their respective national security interests, I wanted to be sure that they were going to bear the bulk of the load. And in fact, they did. What the United States did, as I've said, was use our unique capacities. As I recall, if you want it in monetary terms, slightly over $1 billion or less than what we spend in Iraq in one day is what the United States committed in support of our allies. You know, we ask our allies to do a lot for us, Congressman.
Let me reclaim
They
my
had
time.
asked for us to help them.
Let me reclaim my time because it's expiring. Actually, you summed it up best when you emailed your senior staff and you said of this interchange, you said it's good to remind ourselves and the rest of the world that this couldn't have happened without us. And you were right, Secretary Clinton. Our Libya policy couldn't have happened without you because you were its chief architect. And I said we're going to go back to Ambassador Mull's warning about using military for regime change. And he said long-term things weren't going to turn out very well. And he was right. After your plan, things in Libya today are a disaster. I yield back.
Well, we'll have more time, I'm sure, to talk about this because that's not a view that I will ascribe to.
Recognize the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Again, I want to thank you for being here. I want to start with the number one question that Republicans claim has not been answered in 8 previous investigations. Yesterday, the chairman wrote an op-ed, and he said this is his top unanswered question about Benghazi, and it is, and I quote, why our people in Libya and Benghazi made so many requests for additional security personnel and equipment, and why those requests were denied. I'll give you a chance to answer that in a minute. Secretary Clinton, as you know, this exact question has been asked many times and answered many times. Let's start with the Accountability Review Board. Now, you a moment ago, you talked about Admiral Mullen, but you also appointed another very distinguished gentleman, Ambassador Pickering. And, of course, Admiral Mullen served under Republican administrations, and Ambassador Pickering, who I have a phenomenal amount of respect for, served 40 years, as you know, as a part of our diplomatic corps. He served under George H.W. Bush, and he also served as UN ambassador he also served under Reagan. Now, I'm just wondering, let me go back to that question. Why our people in Libya and Benghazi made so many requests, and then I want you to comment, it seems to be an implication that the ARB, Accountability Review Board, was not independent. And I think the chairman said they were handpicked by you. Of course, that's done by law. But would you comment on those two things, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. As I said in my opening statement, I take responsibility for what happened in Benghazi. I felt a responsibility for all 70,000 people working at the State Department and USAID. I take that very seriously. As I said with respect to security requests in Benghazi back when I testified in January of 2013, those requests and issues related to security were rightly handled by the security professionals in the department. I did not see them. I did not approve them. I did not deny them. Ambassador Pickering and Admiral Mullen make this case very clearly in their testimony before your committee and in their public comments. These issues would not ordinarily come before the Secretary of State, and they did not in this case. As Secretary, I was committed to taking aggressive measures to ensure our personnel's and facilities were as safe as possible. And certainly when the nonpartisan, critical report from the Accountability Review Board came forward, I took it very seriously, and that's why I embraced all of their recommendations and created a new position within the Diplomatic Security Bureau specifically to evaluate high-risk posts. I think it's important also to mention, Congressman, that the diplomatic security professionals who are reviewing these requests, along with those who are serving in war zones and hotspots around the world, have great expertise and experience in keeping people safe. If you go on CODELS, they are the ones who plan your trip to keep you safe. They certainly did that for me. But most importantly, that's what they do every day for everybody who serves our country as a diplomat or a development professional. And I was not going to second guess them. I was not going to substitute my judgment, which is not based on experience that they have in keeping people safe for theirs. And the changes that were recommended by the Accountability Review Board are ones that we thought made sense and began quickly to implement.
Now, the ARB, after conducting, Madam Secretary, more than 100 interviews, identified specific employee at the State Department who denied these requests. It was Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, Charlene Lamb, and again, she did come before the Oversight Committee. The ARB report was very critical of her. It was also critical of her two supervisors, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary and the Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security. The Oversight Committee found the same answer as the ARB. It found that this official denied these requests, and it found no evidence that you approved or denied them. The problem is that Republicans just keep asking the same question over and over again and pretend they don't know the answer. In 2013, the Republican chairman of 5 House committees issued a report falsely accusing you personally of denying these requests in a cable over your signature. The next day, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, Darrell Issa, went on national television and accused you of the same thing. Can we play that clip, please?
Secretary of State was just wrong. She said she did not participate in this, and yet only a few months before the attack, she outright denied security in her signature in a cable, April 2012.
Do you remember that allegation, Madam Secretary?
I do.
Well, when the Washington Post fact checker examined this claim, they gave it 4 Pinocchios. They called it a whopper. It turns out that the Republicans had a copy of that cable, but they didn't tell the American people that your so-called signature was just a stamp that appear on millions of cables from the State Department every single year. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, Madam Secretary, my goal has always been to gather facts and to defend the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Last year I asked our staff to compile an asked and answered database, and this specific issue was answered thoroughly. On Monday we put out another report, and this issue was addressed yet again. But the Republicans want to keep this attack going, so they are now trying to argue that we have new emails that raise new questions. The truth is that we have reviewed these emails, and they don't contradict the previous conclusions. They confirm them. They corroborate them. We've reviewed emails from Ambassador Stevens, and they show that he asked Charlene Lamb for more security. Nothing we have obtained, not the new interviews or the new emails, changes the basic facts we have known for 3 years. Secretary Clinton, let me ask one final question, and please take as much time as you want to answer this. There's no evidence to support the Republican claims that you personally rejected security requests. So some have argued that you, since you knew the danger was increasing in Libya, you should have been in there making detailed decisions about whether there should be 5, 7, or even 9 security officers at any given post. Madam Secretary, I know you have answered over again. You might want to just elaborate and just I'll give you, I have a minute and 7 seconds.
Well, thank you, Congressman. I think there has been some confusion, and I welcome the opportunity to try to clarify it to the best of my ability. With respect, as you rightly point out, the claims that were made about the cables, I think you have explained the fact, which is that it's the long-standing tradition of the State Department for cables from around the world to be sent to and sent from the State Department under the signature, over the signature of the Secretary of State. It's a stamp. It's just part of the tradition. There are millions of them, as you point out. They are sorted through and directed to the appropriate personnel. Very few of them ever come to my attention. None of them with respect to security regarding Benghazi did. Then the other point, which I thank you for raising so that perhaps I can speak to this one as well. There is, of course, information that we were obtaining about the increasingly dangerous environment in Libya, across the country, but in particular in eastern Libya. And we were aware of that, and we were certainly taking that into account. There was no actionable intelligence on September 11th or even before that date about any kind of planned attack on our compound in Benghazi. And there were a lot of debates apparently that went on within the security professionals about what to provide, because they did have to prioritize. The Accountability Review Board pointed that out. The State Department has historically, and certainly before this terrible incident, not had the amount of money that we thought would be necessary to do what was required to protect everyone. So, of course, there had to be priorities. And that was something that the security professionals dealt with. I think that both Admiral Mullen and Ambassador Pickering made it very clear that they thought that the high threat post should move to a higher level of scrutiny, and we had immediately moved to do that.
Go round, I'm down, so down to the bar at the place I'm at. Sitting, drinking, superficially thinking about some rinsed out blonde on my left. And then I said hi, like a spider to a fly. Jump right ahead in my way.
Now recognize the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Brooks.
Good morning, Secretary Clinton.
Morning.
Thank you for being here today. In drawing on what you just said, that very few, but no requests for Benghazi came to your attention, I'd like to show you something. This pile represents the emails that you sent or received about Libya in 2011, from February through December of 2011. This pile represents the emails you sent or received from early 2012 until the day of the attack. There are 795 emails in this pile. We've counted them. There are 67 emails in this pile in 2012. And I'm troubled by what I see here. And so my questions relate to these piles. In this pile in 2011, I see daily updates, sometimes hourly updates, from your staff about Benghazi and Chris Stevens. When I look at this pile, in 2012, I only see a handful of emails to you from your senior staff about Benghazi, and I have several questions for you about this disparity, because we know from talking to your senior advisors that they knew, and many of them are here today, seated behind you, they knew to send you important information, issues that were of importance to you, and I can only conclude by your own records that there was a lack of interest in Libya in 2012. So let's first focus, though, on this pile and what was happening in Libya in 2011. We had an ambassador to Libya, Ambassador Kretz, but you've told us that, and you told us in your opening, you handpicked Chris Stevens to be your special representative in Benghazi, and you sent him there. And by your own emails, most have provided last February, a few provided just a few weeks ago, they show that in March of 11, so we're in March of 11, you had Chris Stevens join you in Paris, where you were meeting with the leader of the Libyan revolution. And after Paris, that is when, as you talked about, Chris Stevens went into Benghazi, I believe in April 5th of 2011, on that Greek cargo ship. How long was he expected to stay? What were Chris Stevens' orders from you about Libya and about Benghazi specifically?
Chris Stevens was asked to go to Benghazi to do reconnaissance, to try to figure out who were the leaders of the insurgency who were based in Benghazi, what their goals were, what they understood would happen if they were successful. It was, as I said, the hard-nosed 21st century diplomacy that is rooted in the old-fashioned necessary work of building relationships and gathering information.
How long was he anticipated to stay in Benghazi? Do you recall?
It was open-ended. We were, in discussing it with him, unsure as to how productive it would be, whether it would be appropriate for him to stay for a long time or a short time. That was very much going to depend upon Chris's own assessment. We knew we were sending someone who understood the area, who understood the language, who understood a lot of the personalities because of the historical study that he used to love to do, and we were going to be guided by what he decided.
I'd like to draw your attention to an email. It's an email found at tab 1. It's an Ops Center email that was forwarded to you from Huma Abedin on Sunday, March 27th. That says at the bottom of the email, so the current game plan is for Mr. Stevens to move no later Wednesday from Malta to Benghazi, but the bottom of the email says the goal of this one-day trip is for him to lay the groundwork for a stay of up to 30 days. So just to refresh that recollection, I believe initially the goal was to go in for 30 days. Were you personally briefed on his security plan prior to him going into Libya? Because yes, at that time, if I'm not mistaken, I'm sorry to interrupt, Gaddafi's forces were still battling the rebels, correct?
Right. That's right.
And so what were you personally briefed before you sent Mr. Stevens into Benghazi?
I was personally told by the officials who were in the State Department who were immediately above Chris, who were making the plans for him to go in, that it was going to be expeditionary diplomacy. It was going to require him to make a lot of judgments on the ground about what he could accomplish, and including where it would be safe for him to be and how long for him to stay. And I think the initial decision was, up to 30 days and reassess, but it could have been 10 days, it could have been 60 days, depending upon what he found and what he reported back to us.
And possibly what was determined about the danger of Benghazi. Who were those officials?
Well, there were a number of officials who were working...
That were advising you on the security specifically.
Well, with respect to the security, this was a particular concern of the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau in which Chris worked.
And I'm sorry, what was that person's name?
Assistant Secretary Jeff Feldman.
Thank you.
And it was also a concern of the Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security, as well as other officials within the State Department. And I think it's fair to say, Congresswoman, this was, we all knew, a risky undertaking. And it was something that was, as I said in my opening statement, more reminiscent of the way diplomacy was practiced back in the 19th century, because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have instantaneous communications. You would send diplomats and envoys into places and not hear from them for maybe months. This was obviously not of that kind, but it was not that different in degree from what we had done before, and it was a risky undertaking, and one which Chris volunteered for and was anxious to undertake.
And it was so risky, I'd like to pull up another email from the Ops Center that was forwarded to you from Ms. Abedin on Sunday, April 10th. So he had been there about 5 days, and it indicates that the situation in Ajdabiya had worsened to the point where Stevens is considering departing from Benghazi. This is within 5 days of him going in. Were you aware of that concern within the first 5 days that he had gone in?
Yeah.
And did anyone share that with you? And
Yes.
who did share that with you?
We were aware because we were really counting on Chris to guide us and give us the information from the ground. We had no other sources. There was no American outpost. There was no, American military presence. Eventually, other Americans representing different agencies were able to get into Benghazi and begin to do the same work, but they, of course, couldn't do that work overtly, which is why we wanted a diplomat who could be publicly meeting with people to try to get the best assessment. But it was always going to be a constant risk, and we knew that.
And so let me go back to the risk in 2011, because there was a lot of communication, once again, from your senior staff, from the State Department, to you or from you in 2011. And in fact, that is when Gaddafi fell. He fell in 2011. But then, when we go to 2012, Libya, Benghazi, Chris Stevens, the staff there, they seem to fall off your radar in 2012, and the situation's getting much worse in 2012. It was getting much worse. And let me just share for you, in your records that we have reviewed, there is not one email to you or from you in 2012 when an explosive device went off at our compound in April. There's not a single email in your records about that explosive device. So my question is, this was a very important mission in 2011. You sent Chris Stevens there, but yet when our compound is attacked in 2012, what kind of culture was created in the State Department that your folks couldn't tell you in an email about a bomb in April of 2012?
Well, Congresswoman, I did not conduct most of the business that I did on behalf of our country on email. I conducted it in meetings. I read massive amounts of memos, great deal of classified information. I made a lot of secure phone calls. I was in and out of the White House all the time. There were a lot of things that happened that I was aware of and that I was reacting to. If you were to be in my office in the State Department, I didn't have a computer. I did not do the vast majority of my work on email, and I bet there's a lot of Sid Blumenthal's emails in there from 2011, too.
Well,
and so I think that there were, I don't want you to have a mistaken impression about what I did and how I did it. Most of my work was not done on emails with my closest aides, with officials in the State Department, officials in the rest of the government, as well as the White House and people around the world.
And thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure that it's not all done on emails, Madam Secretary, and there are meetings and there are discussions. And so then when our compound took a second attack on June 6th, when a bomb blew a wall through the compound then, no emails at all. But I am interested in knowing, who were you meeting with, who were you huddling with, how were you informed about those things, because there is nothing in the emails that talks about 2 significant attacks on our compounds in 2012. There was a lot of information in 2011 about issues and security posture, and yet nothing in 2012.
Well, I'd be happy to explain. Every morning when I arrived at the State Department, usually between 8 and 8:30, I had a personal one-on-one briefing from the representative of the Central Intelligence Agency, who shared with me the highest level of classified information that I was to be aware of on a daily basis. I then had a meeting with the top officials of the State Department every day that I was in town. That's where a lot of information, including threats and attacks on our facilities, was shared. I also had a weekly meeting every Monday with all of the officials, the assistant secretaries and others, so that I could be brought up to date on any issue that they were concerned about. During the day, I received hundreds of pages of memos, many of them classified, some of them so top secret that they were brought into my office in a locked briefcase that I had to read and immediately return to the courier. And I was constantly at the White House in the Situation Room, meeting with the National Security Advisor and others. I would also be meeting with officials in the State Department, foreign officials, and others. So there was a lot going on during every day. I did not email during the day, and except on rare occasions when I was able to, but I didn't conduct the business that I did primarily on email. That is not how I gathered information, assessed information, asked the hard questions of the people that I worked with.
It appears that leaving Benghazi, with respect to all of that danger, leaving Benghazi was not an option in 2012, and I yield back.
Well, if I could just quickly respond, there was never a recommendation from any intelligence official in our government, from any official in the State Department, or from any other person with knowledge of our presence in Benghazi to shut down Benghazi, even after the 2 attacks that the compound suffered. And perhaps, you would wonder why, but I can tell you that it was thought that the mission in Benghazi, in conjunction with the CIA mission, was vital to our national interests.
So if I seem a little distant and preoccupied, just know that little spark in me ain't died. I wanted money, I wanted fame, I wanted
Now, briefly recognize Mr. Cummings and then Ms. Duckworth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify when I was asking.
I wanted to have the world's most recognized face, but then I wouldn't have you standing here with me. So maybe I'm satisfied. So maybe I'm satisfied. I wanted money, I wanted fame, I wanted every swinging Richard to know my name. I wanted time, I wanted space, I wanted to have the world's most recognized face, but then I wouldn't have you standing here with me. Hey baby, I'm satisfied. gonna do when I'm through tonight? Smoking, moping, maybe just a hoping some little girl will pass on by. Don't wanna be alone, I love my girl at home. I remember what she said. She said, my, don't tell lies, keep fidelity in your head. My, don't tell lies, when you're done the show, go to bed. But don't say hi, like a spider to a fly, jump right ahead in my way. Low down, go